Hello, everybody.
Hi, welcome to Carlie's Couch. We're excited for this episode for you today.
I feel like this episode is going to be something that we all need. I am super excited to introduce our special guest, Dr. Sandra Espinoza's son, or is it soon? Let me know if I...
Son is good.
Son, perfect. Dr. Espinoza's son received her BA in psychology at California State University, Fullerton. She received her master's degree in couple and family therapy at Alliant International University, Irvine, and her doctorate of psychology in couples and family therapy from Alliant International University, Los Angeles. She is a strong advocate for immigration reform and immigration rights, and her research has centered around how to best address the mental health needs of immigrants impacted by deportation. Dr. Espinoza's son also focuses on relationships and decolonizing therapy, which is actually why she's here today. Like she has a huge track record of anything she could talk about, but I was actually scrolling on Instagram and saw some really interesting posts that got me scrolling on her account, and I had to hit her like, hey, can you please come sit on the couch with us? Because we have some questions.
So we appreciate you being here with us today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, guys. I'm excited.
So our first question for you is about you and your journey. How long have you been a therapist, and what does that journey kind of look like?
Yes. So I have been a therapist for almost 10 years now. I think maybe even going on 11. I am licensed marriage and family therapist, and so I do have a really small private practice where I mostly see couples and some women identifying clients. But I'm also a full-time faculty member at Alliant University and also the program director there for the couple and family therapy program. And I've been teaching for about almost 6 years now. So it's really nice because during the week, I spend about 5 days a week teaching people how to become a therapist, talking about therapy, and really just kind of diving into the theory aspect of it. And then on Fridays and just kind of sprinkled around, I'll see clients to keep my clinical skills active and also have real life examples to bring into the room for students who are learning how to be therapists. So it's a really nice balance.
That's cool. What makes up a good therapist? What are those key things that you kind of have to instill in them?
Yes. I think that there is a few qualities that budding therapists should have, but the biggest that comes to mind is openness. And I think that really can encompass a lot of things. Most importantly, I think different perspectives and different realities. I've just seen so many therapists who are really closed-minded, come from a very Eurocentric Western idea of what individuals or family mental health should be. And it can be really damaging for clients if they have a very different lived experience, right? And so, for example, having perhaps maybe a white therapist who might be very conservative in their views, who might be treating an undocumented mom of 3, who again is going to have a very, very different lived experience, right? And so that therapist has to be very, very open in terms of how they might work with that client. So, I can go down, a big rabbit hole from there, but I think that the biggest kind of thing is really just openness and curiosity to learn about somebody else's experience.
Yeah, I can imagine you can't come into working with patients coming from a closed view of this is how things should look or this is how it should be.
Right.
And I like how now when you look at a lot of these online platforms, they ask if you prefer a person of color or a certain spiritual background, things of that nature. So that's
right.
Good and probably important to connect on those things.
Right.
But what you're mentioning, is that connecting to this idea of decolonizing therapy? Because that's what you talk about a lot. Carlie kind of already brought that up. But can you tell us what that really means?
Yeah. Decolonizing therapy again is also kind of an umbrella term, and it can, apply to therapy in so many different ways. But in general, it really is deconstructing what we know about psychotherapy historically. Historically, again, it has been presented to us, fed to us from a very individual medical model, kind of pathologizing perspective, and decolonizing would mean to really, focus again on multiple realities and figuring out how instead are maybe like systems, for example, responsible for a person's individual psychopathology. How are systems of oppression and politics, policies also playing a part into what a person might be experiencing? So really like removing the blame from the individual and then putting it back on the system to hopefully create some liberation and social change.
Which is interesting because I would think anyway that the point of therapy or that a therapist would approach it not trying to put the blame on a person.
Yeah, it's just that historically, again, that's the way that we've trained folks. I mean, when you even talk about doctors, right? And like, your Kaiser doctor, he's like, what are you eating? And what are you putting in your body? Are you exercising, etc.? But what makes it difficult to exercise? What makes it difficult
you can't
for you
afford
to
the
access
membership
healthy
or something.
food? Or what makes it hard to access healthy food, right? So maybe it's not all my fault that I'm not well. Maybe it's the society that I'm functioning.
Wow. And you would think that that's intuitive, like we would have known to consider all of these things. But I think the work that you're doing is so important because it's still probably not being done around the vast majority of the United States. Like it's still not even being considered. If you're looking at all the states that are fighting against even teaching anything about critical race theory, like that's what we're up against when it comes to stuff like this. Do you teach this in like, is it a class or is it just part of all of your underlying teachings at Alliant?
Yeah, so we have a diversity class that students take their first year. I mean, it's like one of the first classes they take, right? Because if you don't have an understanding of diversity, you really should not be working with clients, especially in LA. So it's one of the first classes that they teach, and they talk a lot about critical race theory there. But I'm luckily in charge of the program, and so I make sure that it's really embedded within every single class, because unfortunately, for a lot of therapy programs, they'll only get that one class for like the diversity class, and then that's it. There's no mention about how to work with people of color, about how to work with marginalized groups, and the special needs that they might have in terms of mental health. So it's really unfortunate, and I agree, Carlie, that we are really behind in terms of how we're teaching and training psychologists and therapists to work with folks that are different than them, because it's still, a lot of folks are still kind of like practicing from that very pathological individual model.
And I'd imagine it's probably pretty ingrained in people to approach things a certain way. Even if it's a person of color, they may be doing it the same kind of way. So I don't even think it's like certain people like, hey, make sure you understand diversity, but everybody, like there's always these thoughts that we can challenge from ourselves that you don't even realize sometimes until you're probably in a class like this or have to role play it or do something of that nature to step into those shoes.
Yes, absolutely. I tell my students that it's really a lifelong journey of unlearning everything that you really knew about the world, right? Because we've all been socialized to follow the rules, for example, to not question things, to not rock the boat, because white supremacy doesn't want folks to be enlightened. They don't want folks to radicalize, to revolutionize, right? And so you're gonna really have to do so much work to like unlearn all the things that have been fed to you. I mean, unless you've been one of those lucky folks who've had like an amazing, like parent who's like super woke from like the beginning, but like I know I didn't, and I didn't start my journey until like way later. So it's a long process.
And then what would you say that you see a lot of therapists get wrong? Like, are there any examples of things that you can point out that it's like, I see therapists doing this, they should do it this way instead?
Yeah, there's so many examples. One that comes to mind is, and I can share this because this wasn't one of my clients, this was like an anecdote that was shared to me from somebody else that I had met. She was a Black woman and she was seeing a white therapist, and she was seeing him for some like mood symptoms, and I think she was having a hard time dealing with her mom, who was addicted to cocaine at the time. And so she started seeing this therapist, and he right away, starts referring to mom's addiction as a crack addiction. Okay, even though that's not what this woman was suffering from. All right. So there's already, right, there's some microaggressions happening towards this woman. And then he starts seeing the sessions, you know, they're going on. And then he starts saying that he needs a fee, an extra fee on top of his regular fee, towards his mental health, towards his self-care, that he has to tack on to
the therapist said that?
The therapist said that.
No, you got to take care of my mental health.
So, I mean, can you imagine like the power dynamic of a white man asking a Black woman to pay for his psychological labor, right? So this person had, according to this woman, you know, had been practicing in the field for many, many years. This was a seasoned therapist. And this is just like one example of how therapists can be, in my opinion, you know, that's violence towards people of color. That is causing harm. It's illegal, amongst other things. And there's just like so many examples of this, unfortunately. And I say that too, not because I want to scare people away from therapy and I want to badmouth therapy. I mean, you know, this is what I do every day for a living, but it's really important that folks find a good therapist. And if they have bad experiences, to know that not everyone is like that and that there are really good therapists out there.
That is so real. I almost never went to therapy again because the first time I ever went was with a white woman. And I told her all, like, you know, intro session, kind of what's going on. Had never even thought about going to a therapist. My mentor recommended me. This lady had like great reviews, like all these things, went to her. At the end of it, she was like, yeah, you know, I think you might have PTSD and some other things. And then she never called me back or returned an email ever.
Oh my gosh.
And I just was like, yo, like what? And my mentor was like, no, I promise, just try to find a therapist. And I was so scarred. I was like, bro,
she tried to diagnose you?
Well, right at the end of the first intro session, she was like, well, it sounds like you have PTSD and you have this and you have this. So she like stacked things on me. And then she never talked to me again, like never responded to an email, to a call, to anything else. And so I was like, maybe I'm just so broken. Nobody wants to work with me. Thank God that, you know, wasn't the truth. But like you said, like that can really impact people on a real level.
Right.
Did you always want to teach therapists, or is this something that you always knew you wanted to do, was like help train them like in this or just in general?
No. So I, you know, went to school just to become a therapist. I really wanted to work with couples and didn't really have much plans post my master's. But I had an amazing mentor who was like, I think you should go for your doctorate and I think you should teach. And I mean, I am first generation. I'm from El Monte, which is like a lower SES community here in LA. Both of my parents didn't, again, go to higher ed. So I couldn't even have imagined like being a faculty member at a university. I had never had a professor who was Latina or brown even. And so it just felt so far-fetched to me. But this mentor, who was actually, you know, ironically a white dude, really empowered me and believed in me and opened a lot of doors and, you know, just kind of inspired me to do this. And so here I am 6 years later.
And I think it's important because if we're talking about decolonizing, if we're looking at some of the issues that are happening among the system, it's like part of the systemic way to fix that is probably having to be part of teaching and part of the bringing up of other people. For those listening, whether they are like about their therapist or they're thinking about getting a therapist, what pointers would you have for identifying if this is like the right person to work with? Or things to look for? If they do this, then you probably should look at somebody else.
Yeah. You definitely want to steer away from someone who says that they're super eclectic. So for us, when someone says that they're eclectic in terms of their theoretical orientation, it means that they don't have one. It means that they're just borrowing here and there and that they might not have a lot of direction. So you want someone who is pretty committed to a theoretical orientation and has some training in that. The other thing I think that you might want to look out for is just like that first session, like feeling whether or not you can trust that person. So research actually shows that the biggest agent of change for change in therapy is the therapeutic relationship. So it doesn't matter if that person is using CBT EMDR, critical race theory, even, right? Any framework, if that relationship is there, there is so much potential for positive change in a person. So I would really feel out that first session and be like, can I share my hopes and dreams with this person? Can I share my deepest, darkest secrets? Like, is that vibe there? Because if it's not, it will make that therapeutic process a lot more challenging.
Yeah, and I think that for some people, or like even with myself, it's already hard to even talk all the way. Like sometimes before therapy, I'll be like, man, I'm kind of embarrassed to even bring this up. Like, and I'll find myself already trying to go around it. And I'm like, I don't know if that's a sign about just me though, or is that a sign about how comfortable I feel with them? So
right.
I don't know. It might just be a me thing, but it's not.
I think it's hard. I mean,
no, it's not just
because I like, I don't even want her to know all this right now.
No, I think that's a person thing. I think we all do that kind of to protect ourselves. Like, so yeah, you're not alone.
It's a
me
thing?
And I mean,
no, it's not a you thing. It's a we thing. At least a we. I can't speak for everybody else, but it's me too.
I think so. Yeah, I mean, it's really intimidating to meet somebody brand new and then having to share, so many pieces of your life. And so I think it makes sense that first session, you're still kind of feeling it out. But again, if it's already like the 5th, 6th, and you still don't feel a connection with that person, it might be time to find another therapist, because that therapeutic relationship really is huge. And I think something else is just like to find a therapist that's down to earth, because that adds to it. Like there's so much of a power imbalance, I should say first. Therapists hold so much power, and that speaks to what you were talking about, Carlie. Like, they give you a diagnosis, you're trusting this professional who has sometimes a doctorate degree and like it's their expertise. Therapists have to be really aware of how much power they have in that room. And so for me, like, being super down to earth and accessible and vulnerable even sometimes with clients really helps even that out a little bit and makes them more comfortable to share.
Thank you for that. So for all the listeners, if you're working with a therapist, consider some of those things. Do you mostly work with individuals or do you mostly work with couples? Or is it a mix there?
Yeah, so most of my training in the past, I worked for 5 years in community mental health, and I was working with lower SES Latina immigrants who had like suffered trauma of some sort. A lot of the times it was sexual abuse, but also some like physical abuse and intimate partner violence. And so I did that for about like 5 years. It was the most rewarding work. I mean, you guys can imagine, right? Like the resiliency, the stories that you hear, it's just amazing. But also leads to a lot of like burnout, because you're hearing trauma after trauma, like day after day. So I did that, and then I had to step away because I started teaching at Alliant, and then decided to just do private practice to kind of like balance it out. And so now that's where I'm at, and I mostly see couples, and then just again a few female identifying clients here and there.
Did you always know that you wanted to, work with couples, or how did you come into that?
Yeah, I always had an idea that I wanted to. I had really toxic romantic relationships in my 20s that really motivated me to learn more about relationships and just kind of learn more about like what makes them work. So that was always in the back of my mind. But when I started doing all of that like trauma work, it kind of just, took the back seat. But then when I started private practice and I had more like power over, marketing and like choosing who I wanted to see and stuff like that, I chose to kind of dive more into that couple work that I was always really curious about. And now I love it. It is just so exciting, and you never know what you're gonna get, because couples are just so dynamic. Sometimes you're on a good note, and then other times you're breaking up, and so it really keeps me on my toes.
Yeah, as you were talking about it, I was wondering, like, what are some of the challenges working with couples? Because, I mean, this is a very obvious statement, but people are so different. So it's like you have to deal with two different, sometimes maybe personalities or coming from two different viewpoints, and then trying to, or maybe you're not trying to bring them together, but like helping them to understand and explore what's really going on. Is that more difficult than working one-on-one, or maybe not so much?
I and I know I have a lot of colleagues who would disagree with me, but for me, working with couples is easier sometimes than working with individuals, because, and this goes back to like decolonization and systems thinking. When you're with the individual, you're only seeing one piece a lot of the time
Mm-hmm.
of your life. And so you can only promote so much change because you're only working with one person. But if I get to see a family, for example, or a couple, I have more of those pieces of the puzzle that I can, you know, figure out a way to get all of those pieces to work together and then create, right, a new way of like interacting. So having that other person in the room for me just gives me a lot more information. And again, really promotes like sustaining change, because now there's more information being shared. There's more work that's being done essentially that can hopefully translate to outside of the therapy room. So I definitely think it's easier, but I know a lot of a lot of therapists would probably disagree with me.
I could see that though, because on the receiving end, having like my one-on-one therapist, you know, it's like, okay, I feel like I'm doing something. But then I actually started doing couples therapy. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, I didn't know you had all these issues. And like, so it's like a whole different story.
Yeah.
And then it felt weird after that. So then when I talked to my other therapist, it was two different ones. And it's like, man, I feel like now I'm just giving you the one side, and it didn't even feel right to talk about the relationship with the one person when it's like, this is totally different when he's right beside me. And like, now we're really talking about everything and understanding each other's viewpoints.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I really can't stress couples therapy enough for folks. And like, even like you said, even if you're doing well, I think that it's really important to go, because stuff will pop up. And communication is probably one of the biggest reasons why I see couples in my practice, is just poor communication, wanting to connect and not knowing how, and so they send the wrong message. So if you can start working on those communication patterns before they get bad, there's just a higher rate for success, because a lot of the times by the time people get into my office, they're on the brink of breaking up or divorce. So it's so much better to just catch it early on.
Yeah, man, that's kind of a light bulb moment. It's like, you know, when you said being able to see both sides, because now, like you said, when you're in there,
Yeah,
you just hear one
roasted.
person.
And I was like, what? I do what? This is totally different.
But then you're able to see both, because, you know, it's like three sides to the story, one side, the other side, and then the truth. So it's kind of like you can kind of extrapolate from what happened when they both say. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
In the terms of like decolonizing therapy, when thinking about relationships, and one of your bios, it mentioned, you know, helping relationships, how they're impacted with oppressive systems. Can you speak more to that and what that looks like?
Yeah. So an example would be, you know, that sometimes I have partners who just don't know how to show up in that relationship in the healthiest way. And a lot of therapists might just focus on like the trauma that that person might have. Like maybe they were sexually abused, for example, and that's why they have a hard time connecting with their partner. But for somebody who does like the decolonizing work and is really a systemic perspective, it's like, well, what caused that trauma? So was it, for example, like poverty, or was it deportation? Was it, you know, that you were also have been a victim of like racism for the past 25 years, like whatever that is, and really having conversations about those systems and how they might play a role in the presenting problem, so that the client can then raise their consciousness, have a better holistic understanding of their presenting problem. Oh, it's not just me. It was because my parents were really poor and they couldn't keep an eye on me, and maybe that's why I got into trouble, right? And so again, the more that that person has that conscious developed, the more that they can kind of lean towards liberation, advocate for themselves, start to also initiate change in those systems, right? I don't know. I mean, a small example would be like attending protests, or just figuring out really small ways to disrupt systems that may have been oppressive towards them in the past. And then also, again, feeling more empowered to like show up in that relationship in a different way. So again, decolonizing, again, in essence, really is like depathologizing the individual experience and then finding ways to make that system responsible. so that we can also take a step towards shifting that system.
I feel like now we hear a lot more about taking responsibility for your life and accountability and all of these types of things. And then hearing you speak, it's like it makes sense to think about, why I have this trauma as a result of some of these systems, but also it sounds like, is there a thin line between how am I not a victim or is that okay? And I'm just trying to talk it out, but how would you address, that whole like, oh, I'm responsible and accountable, but hey, these things are existing and that has affected me as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. Like that is a really fine line, because this is going to sound so pessimistic, but like, I don't think that I, in my lifetime, am going to see an end to a lot of the oppressive systems that exist in the United States. White supremacy is just so embedded in our country that the future sometimes looks bleak. That being said, clients might have to sometimes understand and accept that they're going to continue to function in a system that is working against them. So at some point, they might have to take that responsibility and initiative towards their healing, because the system isn't going to do that for them, right? So for example, like, I don't know, we'll talk about poverty again. The poverty is not going to get better, right? It's going to be really hard for you to, liberate yourself from that system. But what steps can we figure out so that you can just start to feel better on a day-to-day and survival, really, right? And helping you survive and like navigate the systems that aren't really going to go anywhere. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but also how can I feel empowered and not feel like a victim?
Right. Well, I think you can do both.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that like one has to exist without the other. I think it's important to first understand that you were a victim so that you can feel empowered, right? But again, so having that victim stance, it's like, yes, you suffered at the hands of a lot of oppressive systems, and you probably will and might continue to. However, this is taking a toll again on your mental health, on your day-to-day life. So what can we do to fight against that? And again, to try and tiptoe towards a liberated kind of like mentality. And a small example would be like how to find joy again.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. It's like a yes and.
Mm-hmm.
Yes and.
Yes,
It's
like
like,
we can
yes, you were a
acknowledge it.
victim of this, and it's important to acknowledge so you can understand the impacts and how it might still affect you. And
Right.
you also have to work to heal and to feel better.
Right.
Like when people tell you can't be responsible for everything, but you can be responsible for how you move forward and deal with these things.
I love that.
But I guess a lot of times we do internalize, maybe the trauma instead of ever really thinking about all the things that really added to that, why your family grew up in this place in the first place, or why this or that happened. And so I think that is a little bit more clear now with how that can make sense and you be empowered to further develop and further grow from that space.
Yeah. And it's hard, right? Like, again, it's hard because these systems are going to continue to persist, and we just have to find like small ways to feel empowered. And yeah, like I just mentioned, like one of the ways that I always tell my students is just like find like joy. Everything in this world is working against you being happy. Capitalism, racism, sexism, poverty. I mean, how can you just be happy today? Because that in itself is a radical act.
Mm-hmm. And so when you're in these sessions with couples, does it feel like you're just asking so many questions about like just the foundations of their life and getting them to recognize those things?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the theoretical orientation that you're using. So like if you're doing something that's more intergenerational and you're looking at the past, or if you're using a model that's more looking at the present. So that really like guides what kind of questions you ask. But as, again, a therapist who implements a lot of those like critical race theory concepts, I do think that it's so important to get an understanding of like where folks have been, what has happened to them, so that you can start connecting some of those dots. So I feel like folks should just come into therapy really prepared to maybe revisit some things that might not be, the happiest or easiest to revisit or talk about, but it's absolutely necessary so that we get a holistic kind of picture of what might be contributing to what you're experiencing now.
And you mentioned traumatic relationships in the past, and I know you're married now. Because you're a relationship therapist, do you have a perfect relationship now? Like, what kind of things do you see with yourself? And I always wonder how therapists operate with their own life, if they like stop and step out of themselves and, manage their own traumas and things of that nature. But what does that look like for you?
Yeah. It's definitely not a perfect relationship. There's absolutely no such thing. If anyone says that, they are lying to you. The healthiest relationships actually take the most amount of work. And so for us, and probably being married to me, there's
I see how you crossed your arm. First of all, don't think I didn't notice that. She was like, first of all, she about to keep it real.
So much talking. I'm sure he's just so like tired of just like talking, because we have to talk about everything, right? And it's exhausting. Like, it's tiring. No one wants to talk at 10 o'clock at night when you're like tired and you're upset, but you should try not to go to bed angry. That's definitely like a couples therapy tip. So we do a lot of talking, and it's a lot of work. We just had a baby, which is another added layer to, the stress of a marriage and still navigating that. And so it's a lot of work. But in terms of also, just like being married to a therapist, I mean, there's, I have like late night clients sometimes, and, folks are like breaking up with me on camera. We're sharing, again, things that have been really traumatic in the past. And then I have to, like, right now with teletherapy, like leave the room and then go watch, Netflix or go out to dinner or whatever it is. Like, sometimes it's hard, I think, to transition. And I feel like partners have to be really understanding of that sometimes.
So do therapists have special therapists just for therapists? Or, and I know that sounds real dumb, but I really want to know, how you all take care of your mental health whenever you are carrying so much and holding so much space.
You charge your clients more, a fee.
Oh yeah, the self-care fee, right?
So you can go to the spa.
I thought she said that was illegal. You about to get locked up.
Yeah, there are therapists who specialize in working with other therapists. I saw a Kaiser therapist for a while, and I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to talk bad about Kaiser right now, but sometimes managed healthcare systems don't do the best, again, also at offering good training for therapists. And so that one really didn't work out. But there are therapists who specialize in working with therapists. And so I think that's probably the number one way that we take care of ourselves. And then number two is just like the same advice that I give my clients is like, how do I find joy at the end of the day? How do I do things that make me feel good, that I can unplug with, so that I'm not carrying, my client's trauma on top of my own lived experience, right? And so it's a lot. Can you guys hear me okay? Did I cut off?
It froze for a second, and now I think it's like trying to catch back up.
Okay.
Oh yeah, I see. It's like a slight. Yep. No, it's matching you now.
Sorry about
that. Makes sense. One more question about relationships. If in general you could give us and the listeners maybe like 3 tips or a few tips for a successful relationship, or for those who are coupled up.
Yeah. The first, I think I would say, was to create opportunities for shared meaning. And so setting out a time, a day, or a week, a month, even for folks who are really busy, they might be parents, to do something together that could be new or just fulfilling, exciting, making you feel good. Again, research also shows that the more that couples have these like shared experiences together, that the higher the marital satisfaction will go, because you're creating and assigning a new meaning to an experience. So that could be like trying out for like a boxing class, or, taking dancing lessons, like anything that can keep that relationship like fresh and alive, and again, bring new meanings in. I think that one's always a really good tip. And the second is probably, again, goes back to like communication. A go-to tip is that when you are discussing something with your partner, or even with anybody else really, is to start with an I statement and really just focus on what you're experiencing and what you're feeling, and not blame the other person. So an example would be like, let's say that, your partner left some food out and the food spoiled and they were supposed to put it in the refrigerator. To say something like, I noticed that the food was left out, and, I was really looking forward to eating that meal. I'm wondering if next time we can find a way to like remember to put it back inside, right? So I don't know if you guys noticed, but I really just focused on my experience and using really like neutral language. I never even said you, right? And those neutralizing statements can make it easier to have conversations that can be uncomfortable because there's no blame being assigned to anything. So really working on communication. I think maybe the last tip is just being open and vulnerable, to not be scared to share when you are upset. I think that a lot of the times what fuels divorce and separations is that folks have been carrying resentment for a really, really long time, and they've never been able to share that with their partner. So again, nobody wants to do it at 10 o'clock at night. Nobody wants to do it at 8 o'clock in the morning, but those conversations will save your relationship. It's worth it. It's worth the distress and the uncomfortable feelings. So to do those as often as possible.
How can you share and be open without it coming across as like you always have something to say, because you don't want to ever feel like you're maybe nagging or whatever. But if there are things you're feeling, like you don't want to always have to bring that up.
Yeah. Well, ironically, right, though, like the more that you bring it up, the more opportunities that you're creating for that problem to get solved, or for that conflict to go away. So I would encourage you, at least in the beginning, to still bring it up. And you can preface it the way that you said it, right, Alexia, by saying, I hate bringing this up. This is so hard for me because I don't want you to feel bad, but I just really feel like I need to get it off my chest. I think even saying it that way lets the partner know, like, hey, this isn't about you. Like, this is just still going on for me. I'm watching out for your feelings, but I think we still need to bring that up. So I think couples will notice, though, that if they have a lot of those in the beginning, that they'll actually slow down over time, because every time you're having that conversation, you're building trust. And so once that trust rapport is really, really there and it's high, those little things, you're going to let them fly by next time and the next time, because the relationship is just getting more and more solid from all of that communication that you've been putting into it.
Yep. I can vouch for that too, because that's something I learned when it's like, instead of just holding everything in, because I'm a person, I don't even want to talk about anything, but instead of holding it in and then something crazy happening, it's like, it's okay to express, hey, I'm nervous about saying this, or I'm not really sure how to say it, and just start and get it out. That was good.
Yeah, man.
Good 3 points.
Those were amazing. That's definitely going to be one of the things that we caption after the video. Thank you so much for sharing. I feel like I've grown, like, in my thinking. I'm like, man, I need to write some stuff down and think through some stuff. So thank you for sharing all that. We do a shout out every week, and we always want to highlight our guests to share, like, how can people support you? How can they, like, do you have any resources where they can sign up for something, or where do you want them to follow you if you do? Like, are you
taking any new patients? Like, what you got going on?
Yes. Yeah. So I do have my private practice, and I do take on couples pretty actively. I do like to keep it a little bit small, but I am open right now. You guys can follow me on my website, which is drsandraespinoza.com. And that's the same Instagram handle. So it's all, just my name with doctor in front of it. But yeah, if you guys want to just stay in touch on Instagram, I'm trying to be a lot better again about like posting and just sharing my ideas. Just because I know, again, that like the field of psychology kind of needs that decolonizing social justice perspective. So I'm trying to be better about that. But again, thank you guys so much for having me on and just letting me share my thoughts about relationships and the world.
Well, thank
Thank
you
you.
for
I
all
think
the
it's really
gems.
important just having the lens that you come from. I think that makes it different than just another therapy conversation. And that's important. And I hope the listeners get that out of it to think about, all these other things that are contributing to, what's going on. It's not just you and you having an issue and you're dealing with things, but I would recommend that everybody kind of look more into decolonizing therapy and what that looks like, what that means, and, see if that's helpful.
Absolutely. And thank you for all you do training therapists, like creating a whole program to help therapists learn these things, because I've been to a few not great ones, at least not as well. Let me not call them not great. They might be great in their own right, but they don't understand that. And I think that is very problematic and can be really harmful. So just thank you for doing that work on yourself so you can actually provide that space for everybody else. And then we always end the episode with a question of the week. And I was smiling the whole way through because this question is so you, like, after hearing the episode. So I'm going to ask you first, Sandra.
Okay.
What is one thing you will do today simply to make yourself happy? Will do.
Oh my gosh, Carlie, that's so hard because I don't practice what I preach. I get so bad. I'm like, oh, self-care, whatever, to the clients and stuff. And I'm like, I am so bad at it. So now I really have to think. I'm going to make myself, because I teach late tonight and teach until 9 p.m. So after class, I'm going to make myself a special dessert and enjoy that while watching Netflix.
That's basically what I was going to say.
You deserve, but that's why I was laughing, because the whole time you're telling everybody, find joy. That's how you can, that's radical. Like, joy is an act of rebellion. And so I'm excited for your dessert after class. Lexi, what dessert you making?
I was going to say the same thing. I got some bubblegum ice cream in the freezer, and I was going to pull that out and put on the next episode of the show I'm watching. So I think that, one thing that we in this hustle time kind of always put down, watching too much TV or whatever. And it's I don't watch that much, but I like to actually have a set time. And it's I'm not doing other things. And let me just watch this episode, enjoy this episode, and enjoy that time. It doesn't have to be, something where you feel like you're being a loser just because you're watching Netflix. So that's what I'm going to do too. Just relax.
I was about to say, so I actually have some ice cream too. So that's part of mine, but I'm going to get my shower real hot and put some essential oils in there and just take a whole nice little bath and condition my hair, and then take a little bit of extra time for myself tonight.
That sounds delicious.
Put on some R&B.
You know what I'm saying? And then eat my ice cream.
Oh, boy. That's good. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And all the listeners, we hope you connect with Sandra online and keep up with all the good work that she's doing.
And we'll see y'all next week.